Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for attending ARI's National Science Week Seeds of Science Forum. My name's James Todd. I'm Director of ARI and Chief Biodiversity Officer. I think we've got about 50 or 60 people in the room here at Heidelberg. We might have a couple of hundred online. So thank you very much for making the time. Appreciate that many people are extraordinarily busy. So great that people can make it in person, and for those that can't, people are online. The forum title takes its name from this year's National Science Week theme, which is the Seeds of Science, Nurturing Knowledge for All, and really aims to highlight how scientific knowledge grows and spreads, much like seeds. It encourages exploration of curiosity, inquiry, collaboration, and the sharing of knowledge across all scientific disciplines. For ARI, every project begins with a policy challenge or an idea. So effectively that might be the seed. And we are part of the science we do here. We try and nurture, and we work with our partners to nurture that, to grow it, and hopefully the outcomes and the benefits can be fulfilled and seen into the future. Today's forum, in keeping with that theme, is that we really want to share some of the capabilities and the science that we do here at ARI. Many of you are already valued partners. Some of you might be new to ARI. Some of you might not know much about us all. So hopefully there's a bit in for everyone. We'll be going through kind of examples of what we do and how we do it. Of course, we realise that we can't cover off on everything that happens here. It's a big institute. We do lots and lots of projects for lots and lots of partners. So importantly, today is also an open invitation for anyone here in the room and also online to reach out and connect with us about future opportunities to collaborate. Before we dive in, though, I do want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the countries that ARI works on across Victoria and interstate, and to the traditional owners of the country that online attendees are joining from today. Importantly, we're on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung here at Heidelberg, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also pay my respects to any traditional owners or Aboriginal people who are attending today's forum. And to acknowledge that today we've got a focus largely on Western science. That is just really one form of knowledge, and that traditional owner knowledge is as important, if not more so, in terms of delivering healthy country outcomes. And ARI is committed to working with traditional owners in a two ways of knowing approach under that broader banner. So in terms of the brief for today in the run sheet, we will be, we've got some presentations to begin with. At 11:20 there's a break. You'll note that's only 10 minutes, so there's not too much time. We will want to run on time, so we will be starting promptly at 11:30. If you need to take calls or whatever you might have to do, please step outside the room for the people here. And we will be looking to close on time at 12:30. That'll be for our online participants, that'll be the end of the forum, but obviously for our in-person participants, lunch will be provided, and then there'll be some opportunities. We'll have some tables set up around the room where if you're interested in further conversations with any of the scientists around particular themes, there'll be tables available to come and have a conversation about some of those opportunities. But we will be looking to finish on time, noting that people have got other things to get on with. So what's that all mean in terms of ARI? So we've been around for 55 odd years as part of the Victorian government, and we are Victoria's leading applied ecological science institute. And we do work extensively within government, but we're also a respected part of the broader scientific community, and we work across the private sector and interstate and occasionally internationally as well. We're a leader in Southeast Australian ecosystems and species with expansive and deep expertise and long-term data sets. That means projects don't start from a blank page. We've led cutting-edge projects and developed groundbreaking cost-effective techniques and delivered science into very complex operating environments, and that also assist with some of the policy trade-off that need to be considered. We conduct scientific research and deliver decision support tools that bring together a range of scientific disciplines that are probably not necessarily available collectively elsewhere. And I think that's one of the most important bits about this institute is the number of scientific disciplines and how we can bring those together to answer your policy or management problems, whatever you're concerned about. And our work is really about impact and turning science into effective and evidence-based policy and decision-making, and including practical on-ground implementation and in the case of emergencies, rapid response where required. So we're about 90 plus scientists, as I said, across many different disciplines, and we deliver hundreds of projects and publications and presentations across on a per annum basis. But our value proposition is really around our people. So it's not only the high quality science that we do, but it's really with a problem solving, solutions focused mindset. And importantly, and one of the reasons for holding the forum today is that we have a strong investment into partnerships. And so it's not just about delivering high quality science, it's also our ability to develop and maintain those partnerships that enable co-design of high impact science to inform complex policy and management, along with critical science communication for stakeholders, both internal to government and external as well. Our annual client survey, and I'll touch on this in a bit, indicates we are regarded as good value for money. And we know what working in government's about and what is needed from science in this context, with a focus on timeliness and ready for implementation outputs and products. Our scientists regularly publish in peer-reviewed journals and present at conferences, both nationally and internationally, and we have internal science capability development and science quality assurance processes that guarantee the rigour of the science that we deliver. And the ARI science leadership team, all are here today, really provide a strong science leadership that is well respected and sought out across government and the broader sector. So what's the sort of areas that we, or the challenges that we deal with? And so we work on some of the most complex and most wicked environmental policy type problems that you can imagine that society is facing. That includes wildlife management, so things to do with sustainable harvesting of wildlife, but also overpopulation of native species, and a bit of a topical one at the moment around wildlife disease in terms of preparedness and response. We do a lot of work in the bushfire and emergency planning and response area, work in threatened species recovery, inclusive of a range of plant and animal groups. How to make cost-effective environmental investment decisions. That might be, for example, government making decisions about environmental watering, or it might be about where to invest in landscape or targeted threat management to deliver outcomes for threatened species, or indeed where are priorities for habitat restoration to help recover biodiversity in Victoria. Climate change impacts and adaptation. Example, what are the scenarios for populations and habitat under climate change, and what are the effective actions that might mitigate those, such as risk from increasing fire, and also work that's nascent, and we're working with AgVic on some of these things around soil health and soil biodiversity as a fundamental building block for restoring ecosystems into the future. We do a lot of work with our DECA colleagues on land use planning. And obviously there's been a strong focus recently on the Victorian government's renewable energy targets and transition to renewable energy. So importantly, that work has looked at how we can mitigate or minimise impacts to biodiversity from that transition, but more broadly land use planning in terms of how do we optimise across a range of different land uses going forward, and how do we ensure that biodiversity can persist under different scenarios. And as I mentioned at the start, increasingly we are working with Victoria's First Peoples to address their priorities and participate in 2 ways of knowing research. So our the kind of as I mentioned, we've got leading expertise across Victoria's and Southeast Australia's ecosystems, terrestrial, freshwater, estuarine, and growing marine capacity as well. We can harness our world-leading ecological expertise to deliver high-impact research. Our approach is powered by curiosity and a desire and a mindset of to create impact and find solutions, backed by long-term data and sophisticated data analyses and modelling techniques. And we apply and continue to develop cutting-edge specialist technology and methods that deliver cost-effective science where it's needed most. One of ARI's strengths is that we deliver fit-for-purpose products in a timely fashion that meet the client needs, ensuring that they are implementation ready. And we deliver, as I said, peer-reviewed, publication-ready research, so that provides the assurance and confidence that investors need to have in the science that they're investing in. We are 100% fee-for-service these days, as of in the last couple of years, and so all our projects are funded essentially through our investors, and this is just a snapshot of some of the investors that we work with. We have on average about 300 projects annually across a range of mostly Victorian government, but obviously other government agencies as well as traditional owners and a range of other partners. It's important to note that while we're fee for service, we're still for public good. And so that means that we're interested in ensuring that the value that you get out of that leans heavily on the long-term knowledge and the existing data and knowledge held by the Institute to help solve for some of your problems. And importantly, as being part of government, we're fully compliant with Victorian government regulations and policies, including the VPS Code of Conduct, which means that we can get involved in pretty controversial, sometimes policy issues, and there's confidence that we operate in a way that doesn't create risk. And probably, we have a track record of doing that, and perhaps not surprisingly, some of that's not even obvious to the people in this room because it's work that's done under cabinet in confidence situations. And our research is delivered directly to decision makers, and so the aim of that is that we build our projects around partners' needs and that to ensure that what we deliver is fit for purpose in that sense. And as I mentioned, we conduct an annual client survey. So of those 80 odd clients that we might have each year, we ask them for their views on the work that we do and the value we provide and where we can do better. And our most recent survey indicated that 100% of the respondents, which I think we had about a 95% return, 100% of those would recommend us, and 30% have already done so to other organisations. And that feedback has also indicated a high level of overall satisfaction, value for money, timely delivery of projects, and importantly, taking the time to understand partners' needs. And I think that's one of the benefits of being inside government, is that we can do that, and we remain here as long-term partners to assist you. So how do we do all that? I mean, we'll hear more from our experts today around that, but we've got this essentially a start to finish collaborative research approach that really starts with thinking about the design. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve for here? What information or evidence do we have that might help support the solutions to that problem? From a value of information perspective, where might be able to kind of collect additional data or do some additional analysis to support the working towards solutions to that problem? And if it comes to it, what's the what's a cost-effective sampling design and the scientific methods to do that. We've got a range of collection approaches, of course. Some of that's around on-ground surveys, some of that's around use of existing data sets. Some it's using emergent technologies such as cameras and recorders, but also, remote sensing coupled together with expert judgments and community attitudes. And we pull all that together to analyse using sophisticated data analyses and modelling, whether it's through use of artificial intelligence or scenario testing. We can do habitat and population modelling, genetics analyses, quantitative analyses and spatial analyses. So there's a range of things that we deliver there. And finally, it's also about the application. So the delivery of a range of fit for purpose products, tools, information, advice, support, communication products that really support the end users. So we're now going to hear from a few of ARI's scientists and do a bit of a deeper dive into these areas. I'd again just like to say thanks everyone for making the time to attend today. I hope you really enjoy it. There'll be lots of time for interaction and questions, both through some of the sessions, but also later on over lunch. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Chris Jones, a Principal Research Scientist in our Applied Aquatic Ecology section. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for coming. Good to see a lot of faces in the room and all the numbers popping up online. So today I'm going to talk to you about evaluation. This is a key part of the work that ARI does, and we do this in a lot of different ways. So evaluation largely falls into two categories. We're evaluating the impact of threats. These are things like drought and flood, disease, or the outcome of management actions. These are things that are bread and butter for scientists trying to understand the environment, especially applied science. There's questions that need to be answered where there's an applied action that needs to be addressed. So this includes restoration, disturbance, threat management, and we do this across the entire part of ARI, across the different groups. But why do we evaluate? Essentially, we need to know what's going on. There's a very large investment at state and federal levels about putting money into restoring places, putting money into understanding the disturbances, building resilience to threats, trying to protect and restore our environment. And there's lots of different places that occurs, lots of different ecosystems and lots of different ways that can be applied, different actions. And we have to know for the defensibility of this work to justify the outcome for the government investment, is it working? And not just is it working so that we can say, yes, it worked, but we need to understand how it works so that we can better apply that information, share that information with others, and refine our management systems to improve our outcomes. And this is what we're trying to do. So some of the key evaluation programs that we do at ARI, again, it's across all the different parts of ARI and the different ecosystems. So we've got some key examples here, the Western Plains grassland management. This includes a lot of the environmental work that underpins the Melbourne Strategic Assessment, the MSA, which many of you will be aware of. Management actions trying to improve the grasslands, understanding those actions, the trade-offs between them, and how to improve those actions. Waterbird monitoring out of the Western Treatment Plant. It's a globally significant location, and the processes that they use in the treatment plant to manage their water, supply water quality, influences the bird populations and the resources available to them. And so there's long-term monitoring has been going on for a long time there. Waterway and wetland management. This includes the actual management of the water itself, watering of wetlands, river flows, as well as restoration activities, revegetation, these sorts of things. Fire, flood, drought, and disease impacts are increasingly becoming a high priority for government investment to try to mitigate against these impacts, to build resilience prior, and then also recovery from these actions. We've seen many of these examples in recent years, and right now we're in the midst of a H5N1 bird flu impact that is being very carefully monitored and addressed. Forestry has been a really big one for a long time, forest management in relation to harvest, but then also ecological management of the important taxa within these, includes things around deer and other impacts to forests. More recently, we've had a lot of work in wind farms, the impacts of wind farms, the management so that they are effective and have limited impacts on biodiversity. And also grazing management. And this includes livestock management in areas where they have access to sensitive areas in wetlands and waterways, as well as things like management of mallee woodlands and recruitment of important species, plant species. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper on a couple of case studies for you. Here we're going to talk about environmental water, which is something that I've worked a lot on as a principal scientist in the aquatic ecology section at ARI. But before I do that, I really need to explain what environmental water is just briefly so that you actually do understand it. And basically in regulated systems where structures are put in place to control river flows or wetland flows, this could be levees or dam walls or weirs, the flows and the water hydrology of these places is altered, and that impacts the ecosystems of these places. And that has had a really been a big problem for a lot of aquatic ecosystems. Now, during the drought, it was realised that the environment needs water too, and an allocation of dams and the water assets across all of Australia, but in Victoria in particular, where we're working, those assets need to be petitioned to people and to the environment. And so environmental water was allocated, and that is delivered, let out of a dam or into a wetland to achieve environmental outcomes specifically. And we need to assess if that works, how it works, how to do it well. So I've got a case study for fish and a case study for vegetation. Oops. So the first one for fish, we have this problem. So fish is a major priority ecologically throughout the Murray-Darling Basin and across many states. People love fish, and there's a large government investment to try to manage them. Native fish are a really important part of our ecosystems and a big social and cultural priority. Now, fish respond to ecological processes over large scales. Some small scale in wetlands, some can be thousands of kilometres of interconnected waterways throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. And golden perch is a really good example of this. Tracking of these fish can be many hundreds of kilometres in a single season. And they're occupying these very large habitats. And so understanding this, the ecological outcomes of actions needs to be understanding both site-based outcomes and very large-scale outcomes and how all the pieces connect together. And managers need evidence to understand the outcomes of actions so that they can confidently progress and also refine and improve their actions. Now, the specific project in this case study is FLOW-MER. So it's a flow monitoring evaluation reporting program. It's managed by the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, who essentially manages the allocation of Commonwealth held water, so allocations in dams that can be used for environmental purposes. And they've been doing monitoring through this FLOW-MER program and previously a long-term intervention monitoring program for a long time, collecting data across the basin, the Murray-Darling Basin. Now, ARI has been involved in this project for a very long time in some of the sites and also more increasingly in the basin-wide evaluation. This is a really big challenge and a really significant problem. So you can see here a picture of the Murray-Darling Basin, and these are sites through the FlowMer program scattered throughout the basin. Initially, there was 6 sites, and that's been expanded recently to 10 sites. And there's a problem of, the question is the environmental water allocation doing good stuff? Is it helping the fish to sustain their populations and their recruitment? So this had to be found out to know what's going on. Now, importantly, there's been ARI has had a role in guiding several parts of the program. One is around the monitoring to help to create data standards, monitoring processes to collect the data. And in some ways, there's an element of consistency in this, but there's also being able to allow flexibility, because not all these across, it's a very large area, completely different ecosystem types. There's different methods are more effective in different places. And ARI has been really instrumental in trying to enable that flexibility of methods and still comparing data at larger scales, which is a really complex problem that ARI has spent a lot of time tracking. Now, the repeated surveys that have been happening over a long time try to indicate fish abundance, recruitment, health, population structure to understand the ecosystems. Now, importantly, in this basin-wide scale evaluation, ARI has had a really critical role in building the analytical models for evaluating the data. And so it's trying to understand what are the impacts given a range of factors that are at play. The environmental water itself, the local scale issues, year-to-year variability, and which are the key hydrological components that influence fish, and providing evidence through counterfactual prediction. So we can predict controls in places where we don't have control and treatment systems. So it's a complex issue with really neat solutions. Now, here's some outputs from the recent outputs from a year or so ago, showing impacts of fish throughout the basin through the FlowMer program. And importantly, ARI was involved in bringing together thousands of data points over time from different places with different methods and putting it all into an evaluation approach that was able to understand the impacts. And here you can see that you can't see in the top panel, but there's a larger example here. Basically, what this does is said across each of these areas of assessment, where's environmental water having a positive influence on 8 different fish species and particular life attributes. So there might be for Murray cod in the Goulburn River, environmental flows are really important for adult abundance and adult condition, whereas recruitment is really supported in that system for smelt or the silver or Murray-Darling rainbow fish, these small-bodied fish. And so this is really effective for providing that evidence of saying what are the life history strategies being supported for which fish and in which locations, and how does that vary, which has been really significant for a very large investment into environmental water at a very large scale. Now, this informs the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders evaluation, goes into basin plan reporting, it feeds into larger objectives, feeds into lots of different components that has a big impact on environmental outcomes. Now move to the second case study, which is about vegetation. It's the same problem, but tackled in a different way. The fish monitoring is going on for a very long time, a very large scale. This is a smaller scale, but still the state of Victoria, and it's a significant solution here to a complex problem. So environmental water is also trying to benefit vegetation communities in wetlands and rivers, and managers need to understand what the impacts of those things are. And so we needed to develop a solution that was trying to understand the outcomes of environmental water in these systems, which is a really complicated thing to do because there's lots of things interacting with each other. So we did this by addressing it in a range of ways over a long period of time. The first bit was to try to understand the problem and what the solutions were the pathways to figuring out the problem. So what are the impacts that we're expecting on plants through managed water, and what are the management objectives that we're trying to evaluate or that managers are trying to achieve? Now then we develop methods to detect responses and to understand these outcomes. And the first thing that was considered was a large-scale monitoring program. You go and collect over a lot of years, and that gives you some data and evidence at the end of over a long period of time. But that was never going to be a really easy thing or a quick thing to be able to find out the solutions. So what we did is we actually broke this up into a whole suite of separate projects that tackled the problem in a lot of different ways to get the best bang for buck. So we did large-scale monitoring assessment out in the field in real-world ecosystems to try to understand the outcomes. But alongside that, we wanted to understand the mechanisms. How is that happening? How are we actually getting at this? And this included some field experiments. So there's on the bottom right, we have grazing exposure plots, trying to understand what happened if you prevent livestock from accessing these areas, how much they change, how quickly do they change. This sort of things that are very difficult to do in just a randomized design. So it really gets at the heart of the process. Also in that figure, we have in that image, soil moisture monitoring. Water's going up and down along the bank. How is that influencing soil moisture, which is one of the major pathways for influencing vegetation communities. On the lower left, we have an experimental approach, and we've had about 6 separate research projects in collaboration with Melbourne University to understand mechanisms for different flow impacts, inundation on plants. So how long can species tolerate being underwater? How much does it vary between species? How much does it vary among seasons? All of these things we're able to tackle directly through a controlled setting, which would take decades in the field to be able to get that information. Then we went and conducted these surveys, conducted these projects over, it was an 8-year period where the majority of this work was done. Many separate research projects, all stitching together to tackle a larger connected problem. So each independent research projects, all part of one essentially giant assessment project. And then we evaluate and report, put it all together and provide the information to managers and funders so that we can, so that managers and funders can then apply that information and make better decisions and strategic decisions around funding. So just briefly with some of the results, we found a whole suite of different things across the project. I'm going to show a couple of little things here, not in detail, but just to give you a sense of the types of things that we're doing. So from our field work, we were able to understand the influence of different flow durations in the natural setting on different groups of plants. When we know that some water is beneficial and then lots of water over a long period of time becomes detrimental, you can drown a lot of these things. So where's the sweet spot for these different things? We're able to understand and isolate those things for different flow components in different and see how it varies across space. We were able to understand temporal patterns of plant recruitment in waterways and also seasonal patterns and try to link that to environmental flows and how environmental flows can actually influence the recruitment process to support populations. We did expert elicitations to fill in the gaps where our data wasn't able to address problems. We wanted to look at the impact of flow management actions and a whole suite of other non-flow actions, livestock grazing removal, exotic plants, competition, turbidity aspect, dense canopy, all these sorts of things, which again, you would need enormous data sets in the field to be able to understand the impacts between these things. And so expert elicitation was used as a shortcut to be able to understand some of these things. We looked at the drivers, like particular flow attributes that influence aquatic ecosystems, and what are the conditions that drive in-stream plants and in-stream plant communities. And then there's a bunch of experimental work captured by that tiny little figure in the end, looking at the impacts of different inundation periods or conditions that influence different plant species at different times of the year. So we can say we have a 1-week inundation or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then see how the plants respond over that gradient. So the outcomes, we developed across this whole suite of projects an improved understanding of the responses. We really do now understand how this works. And we had a pretty low bar to start with, just general principles, which is a really effective, a great outcome. And it required all of those different bits to be able to understand it as thoroughly as we do now. Importantly, this influences management. We know now how effective these management actions are, and the ways that managers can change their flow regimes to be able to improve or alter the outcomes. Changing the timing of their flows does this. Changing the duration of the inundation does this, and it affects different plant groups or plant species in different ways. So that has helped to alter the management actions to be more cost effective and to achieve better outcomes for vegetation communities. And lastly, the evidence for the investment outcome. So now investors have more confidence that the environmental water is doing what they want it to do, which is really critical to support long-term application of these management actions. So it's been a pretty effective and a pretty interesting project to be involved in, that one in particular, and we're doing the same for all these projects across ARI. These are just a few case studies of the enormous amount of projects that we do in this space, trying to understand these things and to make them directly applicable to managers. And I think from a personal point of view, in terms of application, ARI is the best place to do that through research, because we are directly working with the policymakers and the managers to provide information. We understand their constraints, we understand their concerns, we talk to them directly about the problems and then the solutions and how to apply them. That's it for me.
Good morning. My name's Dave Ramsey. I'm a principal scientist here at Arthur Rylah Institute and a member of the wildlife ecology team here that undertakes a lot of research into native and introduced species. So I'm going to talk today about some of the management programs and wildlife management issues that we undertake research in. So broadly speaking, wildlife management research that we undertake here falls into three broad categories. First category is sustainable use of native wildlife. So we have a program here where we undertake research into sustainable harvest of recreational harvest of native ducks. This is an interesting issue because we have an imperfect control of the management levers. So the hunters are mainly doing the harvesting, and our ability to control the size of the harvest therefore has a high amount of uncertainty. Another sustainable use problem is the issue of overabundant kangaroo populations. So during years where environmental conditions are good, kangaroo populations build up, and then when there's the inevitable drought, populations start impacting agricultural properties, necessitating some sort of control. The issue here is that there's a native species, so we want to ensure that management here doesn't incur any long-term harm on the population. We also undertake research on impacts of invasive species. So this is basically around managing spread and impacts of invasive species like deer. We have 4 species of deer in Victoria, things like feral pigs, foxes and carp. So management mainly is around suppressing, how to best suppress populations to below damaging levels, which is undertaken for some widespread populations. Smaller populations, we might want to undertake eradication programs. How do we do that? Also, how do we limit spread and incursion into new areas? We also undertake research on wildlife disease impacts. And this is mainly around understanding how we would manage exotic disease incursion or diseases that might impact agriculture or human health, things like foot and mouth disease and Japanese encephalitis, where there is a wildlife host. How do we manage the wildlife host to limit impacts? But we've also been doing some other work for things like avian influenza as well. And the third category is management of native species, and this is mainly around how do we understand the impacts of land use changes on things like koalas or boreal marsupials, so impacts of things like planned burns and environmental water, which Chris talked about earlier. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an area that we've been developing over a number of years related to how do we undertake large-scale wildlife surveys. So large-scale wildlife surveys are required, often required for species that are obviously widespread and where the management itself might also be undertaken over large spatial scales. And so we undertake these surveys to get some information on develop population estimates to understand the current status of the population and to look at long-term trends over large areas. So to undertake this requires some attention to things like survey design. You can't sample, you know, when you're doing surveys over large spatial scales, you can't sample everywhere. So you need to generalise from the sample to the larger population. And so we need to be able to design sampling strategies that are representative of the habitat and climate envelope that the species inhabits. So traditional ways of doing this is using things like random sampling, but this can be very expensive and is quite inefficient. So we've been developing approaches that are more cost effective based on achieving things called spatial balance. And spatially balanced surveys maximise the information content from survey locations. We also need to undertake monitoring methods that are scalable over large areas. Traditionally, things like aerial survey has been used for large species in fairly open habitats, and it's quite efficient and it's still used a lot. And we've been using it for a number of issues here. But increasingly, we've been asked to look at, undertake large-scale surveys for more cryptic species that inhabit heavily wooded areas. So ground surveys are primarily used there. Traditionally, these have been undertaken using observation techniques with human observers, using spotlights or daytime surveys, but we're increasingly using more high-tech methods based on remote cameras and acoustic recording devices. The other part of undertaking surveys is understanding the habitat information about the species across the area that inhabits, and this involves collating data from on bioclimatic variables, from spatial data sets from places like Google Earth Engine or some of the departmental spatial layers. And this allows us then to build some statistical models between the data that's been sampled and some of these habitat variables. And then we use those models to predict to unsampled areas across the landscape. Normally these models use an integrated modelling approach because when we go out and survey, we don't often use one technique, we might use multiple techniques. We might have counts from cameras, or we might have detections from acoustic devices. So how do we integrate that information in a smart way and combine it so that our models have are more efficient and give better predictive accuracy? So I'm going to talk about a case study now, and this is work that we're involved with over a number of years related to managing recreational harvest of native ducks. So as we know, recreational hunting of ducks in Victoria is quite controversial. Generates a lot of conversation each year during duck season. So back in 2023, there was a parliamentary inquiry into recreational harvesting of native ducks. And the outcomes from that inquiry was that government agreed to continue to allow recreational harvesting, but they made a commitment to ensure that recreational hunting was sustainable. So in order to do that, decisions around managing harvest needs to be evidence-based. So ARI has been partnering with the Game Management Authority over a number of years to develop what's called adaptive harvest management. And this is a program that allows an investigation into the impacts of harvest and environmental fluctuations on duck populations, and to learn about how uncertainty might impact harvest decisions. So the main areas of uncertainty are: what are the environmental uncertainties? So how does environment affect fluctuation of duck populations? And management uncertainty: how does changing management regulations affect harvest? So just for a bit of context, there are 8 native species of duck that are subject to recreational harvest. And currently, the size of the harvest is managed by government by setting what's called seasonal regulations. And these are changing things like the bag limit, so the amount of ducks that hunters are allowed to shoot each day, and the length of the hunting season, which for a full season usually occurs between March and June each year. The target for our adaptive management program is to try and manage harvest at no more than around 10% of the statewide population size of ducks that are present at the start of the recreational season. So as part of this, as part of this program, some initial research was undertaken to look at what are the actual sustainable levels of harvest that the main game species of ducks could tolerate. And this research indicated that for the 3 main species, so things like wood ducks and grey teal, those populations could tolerate up to 20% harvest rate each year sustainably over the long term. However, for our AHM program, we resolved to adopt a more conservative target of managing harvest to a 10% level of offtake. So this is called a proportional harvest system, and this is a very efficient way of managing harvest for populations that are known to undergo fluctuations. The other component of the research is to understand how duck populations fluctuate due to environmental conditions. So what are the long-term impacts of things like climate change and indeed things like disease, which is a current topic at the moment. How does monitoring data used to assess impacts of hunting and environmental factors on these long-term trends? So I'm just going to talk a bit about the population surveys that underpin this adaptive management program. So each year we undertake a statewide population survey of game ducks in Victoria. It's undertaken in October, November each year. It's undertaken primarily using aerial survey. So during these surveys, over 850 water bodies are surveyed each year. And the research that we undertook identified that a stratified design, so different water body types such as natural wetlands, dams, including small farm dams, sewage treatment ponds, rivers and streams were the most important habitat for game ducks. And so that's where we sample. Also, we know that duck populations require access to water. So if we're going to predict what population size of ducks are each year, we need to have some understanding of how much surface water there is in the environment. And so we derive this information from primarily from remote sensing data. So we gathered information from about the locations and extent of native water bodies and farm dams from spatial layers derived from Digital Earth Australia originally, so water observations from space. Farm dams from originally from spatial layers curated by the department. And then we process those, and then each year we use satellite imagery, either Landsat or Sentinel-2, and which use water detection algorithms to determine how many of those water bodies contain surface water. And this is undertaken each year for over 400,000 water bodies in Victoria. As I mentioned earlier, following our aerial survey, we have sample data. We then build some statistical models based on some attributes for each of the water bodies that we sample. And then we use those statistical models to predict abundance to all water bodies across Victoria that were predicted to contain surface water. And that's the basis for our population estimates. So currently we have about 5 years of population trends for each of the 8 species of game ducks. So the most common species are things like Australian wood ducks, grey teal, Pacific black duck and chestnut teal. Those are that graph there shows the population changes over the 5 years since 2021. Just be careful, the scale on the y-axis on the square root scale, so just have to be careful with interpretation there. Another part of the research I haven't really talked much about is we then use the population estimates along with some other modelling that we do to predict what bag limits are likely to result in a target 10% harvest. And that's what is used to set the seasonal regulations each year. Following the harvest season, the recreational harvest season, we then collect some more data on the size of the harvest, and then we compare our predicted to our total harvest just to update the models, see where the major sources of uncertainty are, if there's any discrepancy, and update and then repeat for the next year. So future developments, now that we've collected a little bit of data to start assessing trends, we want to start looking more closely at population dynamics for these species and how effects of environmental variation affect population dynamics. So things like fluctuations in surface water across Victoria, and how does that influence population change from year to year. And also we want to get a better understanding of uncertainty around harvest decisions. So we're presently undertaking some more work around that. And that's all I have. Thanks very much. Thanks for your attention.
Hi everyone, my name's Angie Haslam. I'm in the Community Ecology section here at ARI, and I'm just going to give you an overview of ARI's work in the area of decision support. So decision support tools, no, that's right, sorry, are something we regularly develop here at ARI to assist our partners make complex decisions and evaluate ecological outcomes in a range of areas, including but not limited to prioritising investment in relation to threat management, forest planning, restoration of waterways, environmental flows and renewable energy developments. Sorry, I've got to get the mouse pad. Our tools synthesise complex data to help decision makers do a range of things. So compare biodiversity outcomes across different management scenarios, weigh trade-offs across different values and explore uncertainties. And across all of these things, make transparent evidence-based decisions. An important feature of our decision support tools is that they are continuously being improved. So they benefit from a number of large empirical data sets that ARI is custodian of that have been collected across all the projects that we've delivered over time, both large and small, as well as expert elicitation, which we use to fill gaps in these empirical data and use to provide information where it's very hard to collect empirical data. And this improvement is an iterative process that includes both updating the data that feed into the models and updating the models themselves. So a guiding principle underlying all of our tools is to synthesise complex information to support decision makers, whilst also retaining the more detailed information for when that's required as well. And another aspect is the aim to bring all data together that's relevant to the particular decision problem to provide a comprehensive information about biodiversity across Victoria. So ARI have developed a large number of decision support tools across our sections. I'm going to give 3 quick examples to give a bit of an idea of the breadth of them. One is strategic management prospects, and this tool helps managers identify the most cost-effective location to invest in threat management. So what it does is it integrates a large amount of information on the benefit of different common management actions that DECA employs, so things like fox control, cat control, weed management, that sort of thing. Benefit of those actions across large number of species, plants and animals, and also brings in information about the cost of those actions to allow identification of priority actions and that are specific to different locations. So it's spatially explicit. It's available on NatureKit, so it's publicly available tool, and it's widely used by biodiversity policymakers here and also investment decision makers to target DECA's annual biodiversity funding. We've also developed several software packages to support the environmental effects statement process. So these packages are based on population models that enable population viability analyses for a large number of species that allow partners working in different areas, so including floodplain restoration partners and also pumped hydro partners, to estimate the ecological impact of different types of river intervention on ecological outcomes, so whether it's a pumped hydro project or restoration work. A final tool that I'm going to talk about briefly is the fire analysis module for ecological values. This is otherwise known as FAME, you might be familiar with it. It's a tool that enables managers to estimate the ecological outcomes of fire across Victoria, whether it's bushfire or planned fire. So it's regularly used by fire managers in both strategic positions and also within the regions to evaluate outcomes of different fire management scenarios and weigh off those outcomes in relation to outcomes for different values. So I'm now going to focus on a case study, which is a project that really provides a good example of this process of bringing together lots of complex information to develop new data that supports biodiversity decisions. This project is a current collaboration between scientists here at ARI and at Melbourne University, or University of Melbourne. And it's an externally funded project that's running for 2.5 years that's funded by disaster-related funding scheme. The impetus for this work was recognition that fire regimes under climate change will pose a growing threat to biodiversity across Victoria. And in parallel to that, there's a need to improve and expand the knowledge that's available to decision makers given this growing threat. So for example, there are gaps in our knowledge about how different species respond to fire, or how to strategically plan fire now in a way that reduces this risk to biodiversity from fire in the future. This is the aim of the project, but more simply, what we've been working on is developing methods that allow us to produce maps that allow us to identify the locations and the species that we expect to be at increased risk from future fire in the future, and then identify which management actions we might employ to reduce this risk, or where there might be gaps in what our management can do to mitigate this risk. Now, to address this aim, what we've done is brought together a large number of existing tools and data and combined them with new methods and outputs developed as part of this work. And we're starting to think about how to package up these outputs to support different decision contexts. And I'm going to give some examples relating to emergency bushfire management. So the framework that we're using to work through this problem includes 4 broad components of work. Firstly, it's a matter of estimating the consequence of future fire for biodiversity. And here we've taken a trait-based approach that includes both empirical and expert data, covers plants and animals and different fire regime attributes. A second focus is on estimating the likelihood of future fire. Here we've got a statewide perspective that covers a couple of different timeframes and also climatic conditions. Both of these pieces of information feed into understanding where in the landscape there's likely to be increased risk to biodiversity from future fire. That's at the individual species level, and we can also aggregate to provide a whole of biodiversity perspective. And then lastly, identifying which actions we might bring to reducing this risk to biodiversity. And across all of these stages, we've got a focus of sort of broad scale, Victoria-wide understanding and across as many species as possible. I'm just going to go through each of these 4 stages in coming slides. So to estimate the consequence of future fire for biodiversity, we've brought together information on fire mapping, habitat distribution models for individual species, and a number of different fire response data sets from different sources. That's allowed us to calculate the proportion of species population area across Victoria that's estimated to be lost due to future fire. Now, this information can be mapped, it's spatially explicit, and there are a couple of examples of different maps or maps for different species here. We've developed these maps for 400 odd animal species and around 1,000 plant species. Now, we've packaged these inputs up into a decision support tool called FireDiver with a specific thought to support emergency management. What FireDiver does is for any given bushfire footprint, it will calculate the consequence of that particular fire event for each of these 1,400 species. And this is information that can help assist prioritisation of response and recovery actions for biodiversity planners. And it's also got information on the traits of individual species. So this can help identify different management actions that might be useful given those species that are likely to be most impacted, to inform those responsible for post-fire recovery in the short and long term, both within DECA and external to DECA. The next stage is estimating the likelihood of future fire. And again, here we've drawn on a range of different data sets to do this, to develop estimates that encompass different timeframes. So short-term predictions give us a picture of the likelihood of bushfire in the next fire season, whereas longer-term predictions can support more strategic planning. But across both of these timeframes, we're interested in statewide predictions to give a view of the likelihood of future fire across Victoria. And then it's a matter of bringing these 2 pieces of information together to estimate the risk from future fire to biodiversity. So the process here follows standard protocols for risk estimation. So like, or rather unlike the categorical classifications that risk matrices provide, our process provides a continuous and quantitative estimate of the risk to biodiversity from future fire. Now, to synthesise this information, we can aggregate estimates across species to provide a more integrated view of risk across all species for which we have data, which can be more readily interpreted than the 1,400 individual maps. But those, that information is also available when there's species-specific information that is required. So this information has value, we think, for informing preparedness planning by biodiversity managers ahead of the next fire season by identifying either the locations expected to be at increased risk or the species. So it allows for some forward planning. And then the final stage of our framework involves identifying management actions that may help maximise species persistence in the face of future fire. So far, we've focused here on management actions that boost species resilience to other threats, so such as fox predation or invasive herbivores, as opposed to management that targets reducing the risk of fire itself. Now, to do this, we're using information from Strategic Management Prospects. That's the tool that I mentioned earlier that has benefit estimates of different management actions for different species. The question we're interested in here is whether the risk that future fire poses to species and biodiversity more broadly can be mitigated by these other management actions. If it can, for what species? So what species might fox control have particular benefits for animals and in which location? So it would be best to target our management actions perhaps to fire refugia or to areas where fire risk is greatest. That's the sort of questions that these outputs can help us explore. So this information has value for strategic decisions about where to undertake management to increase the resilience of biodiversity to fire, either in the short term, so in response to individual bushfires or even planned burns, or in the longer term with a strategic planning perspective. So in this particular case study, risk to biodiversity has been considered primarily in relation to fire, but we know that fire is only one of the threats that affect Victoria's biodiversity. So scientists here at ARI are working towards a more fully integrated decision support tool that captures multiple interacting species, threats and actions, operates across realms, so it incorporates terrestrial, freshwater and marine systems, and also operates across space and time. So this tool will be based on dynamic models that are continuously being updated with new data as it's available or as different environmental events occur across Victoria, so fires, disease outbreaks, that sort of thing. The objective of this is to ensure that biodiversity decisions are more responsive because they're based on most up-to-date information and also underpinned by the best available science that draws on information about a greater range of the complex and interacting factors that we know influence Victoria's biodiversity. So the aim of this section has really just been to highlight the work that ARI does in this space of decision support and to emphasise the breadth of different sorts of decisions that these tools can assist with. Usually they're developed in response to partners' needs, but that's not always the case. So for example, this fire project here has been about developing new knowledge to fill gaps that are recognised in the information that's currently available to decision makers. So essentially pushing the science forward and then packaging outputs up in a way that enhances their capacity to support decision making. Irrespective though, all of these tools benefit from existing data sets that ARI have developed across past projects. So spatial layers, for example, we've got habitat distribution models for hundreds of different species across Victoria. Diverse data sets that have also been developed across projects, whether it's empirical or expert data, and expertise in software and app development. So all of these can be drawn on for future projects. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ange. We are, like most things that ARI deliver, we're ahead of time, right? So I might get Chris and Dave and Ange to come back up because probably got time for one or two questions. So we might take a couple from the floor and then Andy, I'll ask you to just keep an eye on the online team and you'll have to yell out, I think, and we'll repeat the question if we get it from the floor. So hands up. Yep.
Tom Kronsky from the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Just getting across what's happening in Victoria. So
thanks, John. So I'll just repeat that. So the question is around the complex models that ARI has developed. How are they publicly available or are they part of ARI's IP? I'll let anyone answer that one.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a mix is the answer. So thinking about strategic management prospects, that's available on NatureKit. Part of what's been developed for that particular tool is publicly available, but there's a whole lot of additional information that is sort of not publicly available, but is within the data sets that ARI have that would be, I guess, available for consideration for future projects, for example, can feed into other projects. Yep, same for the HDMs. I think they're available for threatened species, but not non-threatened species. Yep.
Thanks, Ange. Yeah, so I mean, part of our role here is that we've now got our biodiversity information systems team within ARI as well. So there's a governance around kind of the research products that then end up becoming public-facing products and how we make decisions around that. So some of the models that are presented here today are publicly available. Others are research models for specific purposes. And obviously there's a whole heap of data that underpins those that may not necessarily be available. Any other questions?
Thank you, everybody. That was terrific. My name's Fern Hames. I'm from the Tangarong Land and Waters Council. It's a question for Angie. Thank you so much. The fire diver stuff was awesome. It's a question about the possibility of bespoke versions. So I'm wondering, like, I'm imagining one that is scaled for Taungurung country, for example, and that might have additional species or biocultural entities included. So they might not be threatened species, for example, but things that have other values. What's the possibility and how would we partner on something like that?
Thanks, Fern. So the question was, what's the capacity for making a bespoke version of Fire Diver that might represent priorities of, in this case, the Taungurung traditional owners, but it could be other groups. Yes, there's good potential for that. So at this stage, Fire Diver isn't just limited to threatened species. So we've incorporated all the species we have data for, but there's absolutely scope to incorporate other entities or value, sort of things of value to different groups. What we need to develop is understanding about how those particular values are affected by fire. So there might be some work to develop that, but absolutely, I think that would be a fantastic thing to do. And, yeah, great.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, we might break early for a morning tea. Welcome back, everyone. Great to hear the hum in the room at morning tea. Hopefully people online also got the opportunity to take a little break. So now we move to our interactive session. We've got a panel up the front and I'll soon ask them to introduce themselves. Prior to the forum, and I think when most people registered, you may have posed a question that you would like to ask of the ARI scientists. So thank you to those people who've done that. We've gone through and pulled out the ones which have a particular sort of popularity around certain themes. So I'll be then asking some questions of our panel members around those questions. And then we've got about an hour or a bit under, finished by 12:30. So there'll be an opportunity for questions from the floor and online. So with that, I think the other thing is we've got one mic, which is perhaps a bit unfortunate in terms of interaction, but we'll manage that through. And I might get Jenny to introduce herself first of all. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. So great to see.
Stand up, Jen.
Oh, okay. I'm not very tall.
That's no comment on height.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people here in the room and also online. My name's Jenny Nelson. I'm one of the principal research scientists here at ARI. I've been working here for many decades. I'm not going to tell you how many. It's quite a lot. Not 40 though. And I manage the wildlife ecology section here. So Dave Ramsey, who did the talk earlier today that you would have seen, he's in my team. Right. I'll pass on to Jared.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name's Jared Lyon. I am a principal research scientist too and lead the aquatic ecology team. So Chris is in my team. So we've got about 30 staff working on all the wet parts of the state, I suppose. I've been here a long time too, 26 years, I think. I guess, I've done stints at fisheries and with big catchments. I see some big catchments people here today and CMAs, but always found my way back. It's a great place to work. I suppose I've got a background as a researcher, but increasingly now in this role, and probably the same as these guys here, we operate sort of in the science policy management divide. And so a lot of the work I do is understanding problems, I suppose, that our policy stakeholders have got. In the watery space, it's probably our major clients are Water Division in DECA and also MWA and TUO. And catchment management authorities, those sorts of groups. So we work quite closely with them. We're quite applied in nature, a lot of field work, that sort of stuff. So.
Thanks, Jared. My name's Tracy Regan. I'm principal scientist here as well. For the community, I lead the community ecology section, just fairly new. Tim O'Brien was leading that for many years. I've been here for about 12 years. Prior to that, I've had a stint in academia and also did a tour of duty overseas, working with the US federal government in one of their science centres. My background is in ecological risk assessment, ecological modelling and decision science. So I now lead a team here of about 30 researchers. So Ange, the work that she presented that sort of sits within my team, but we also focus on a lot of, so the MSA ecological program sits within the community ecology section, as well as a lot of bird monitoring as well. So.
Great, thanks, Trace. All right, so as I said, we've gathered some questions from our pre-forum survey. The first one, perhaps for you, Jared, is around ARI's priorities and funding. How does ARI set its organisational priorities and secure funding for long-term environmental research?
All right.
I'm waiting to hear what the answer is.
Right up my alley, this one. So obviously, as James has already alluded to, our funding structure has changed a bit. Look, I think when I started, we were about 25 to 30% what's called recurrently funded, and then the rest was projects. And so that's evolved over time, as most organisations have, until last year. We sort of had a little bit of what recurrent funding left. That's gone now. So we're 100% project funded. As most of you would know, that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in some ways because it's harder to cut if you're going through difficult times in government, but it's also a curse because it's quite a high workload. It's a big institute with a big budget, and so you know, maintaining that amount of funding to a big range of scientists is you know, a major part of what a lot of us do. How do we set our organisational priorities? I think, as you would understand, given that funding structure, our priorities are largely set by the clients we work with, which is probably good because that means we're delivering research that has a use, which is good. I think underneath that, most people that work here realise that, you know, we're working on in areas that is while a small section of the sort of whole of Victorian or Australian overall budget, it's still quite large. So at the back of the envelope, you know, there's $1 to $2 billion spent on environmental restoration in Victoria. And I know one of the reasons I got into this game was making sure that with that amount of money being spent, that we can demonstrate that it's being spent well and also demonstrate how to spend it better in the future. And that drives me, and I know a lot of people I work with, that, you know, ever decreasing resources, we've got to make sure that we giving advice to make sure that they're used well. Underneath that, we do have some organisational priorities. We're currently redoing our research strategies. So there's people in ARI generally stay at ARI for a long time. And so we see people come and go in other parts of government. And so there's a huge knowledge base here that understands, that has an understanding of the ecosystems in Victoria. And I think we use that to try and work with our partners, whoever they might be, so our current division or people in water or people at MDBA, and try and work with them to use the knowledge that we've got to help them articulate the problems that they might have. Quite often, you know, you've got a tricky policy problem come up that someone hasn't seen before in an organisation. It would be unlikely that someone in this place hasn't seen it before one way or another when you've been around long enough. And that sort of institutional knowledge is, I think, quite one of the strengths of a place like ARI is, you know, there's a long history of sort of environmental research in this place, and that's a really strong thing. So I think in terms of our priorities at the moment, really they're the priorities of our managers, but also underlying that, you know, there's things that we think are important as an organisation that we're currently working through at the moment, a priority setting program about, you know, how we might use the things that we think are important to influence others.
Thanks. Jen, Trace, do you have anything to add to that?
nailed it.
I might make one comment. So the investment through partners is obviously really important, and it means we are delivering science that, you know, kind of is fit for purpose, as I've talked about. One of the things is that one of the challenges is that, you know, we live in interconnected ecosystems and that don't line up neatly with policy silos. And we're really conscious of the fact that we could deliver integrated solutions to help policy, but the investment comes through the policy streams. So it's suboptimal in my mind, and DECA particularly could look really hard at how it invests into science and research to be more holistic for its portfolio. Okay, the next one's around collaboration. Tracy, I might ask you this one. How can partners best engage with ARI to access scientific advice, collaborate on projects, and understand ARI's role across government?
Thanks, James. I think we're a pretty friendly bunch, so don't be scared to reach out. I think anyone here within ARI are more than happy to chat to people. I think in the first instance, if you don't already have connections with ARI, just the email of the research.ari email, that will reach the relevant people. So that's an easy way, but really you can reach out to any of us, James, any of the staff that are here today. In terms of how, I think it's really good to do it fairly early on, because there's a lot of, as Judd was saying, and we've a lot of problems that we've dealt with again and again. So there may be work and data sets that we already have curated that we can build on to solve the particular question that you have. So there's some potential efficiencies there in terms of the kind of work that we can provide, and I suppose the value of it, given that we're building on something that we already have. It's good to do it early as well because of the whole design. Like often we might have a general idea about what the problem is, but once you start scratching the surface, it's actually a lot more complicated than initially thought. And so working, and we're more than happy to work through, and we see it as a really important part of problem solving, is developing that shared understanding of the problem with everybody involved, and what is the evidence base that's required to help address that. Because there'll be a whole lot of things that are important. It's not just an ecological evidence, but there's a whole lot of other policy. There's often other values that are brought to the table, and a whole range of stakeholders depending on the problem. We're happy to be engaged at any part of the problem. So as James mentioned, we can do this sort of end-to-end approach, but we're also happy to sort of slot in and at any stage along the process. So in small projects to really large projects. In terms of timing, obviously more time is better, but for us, we tend to around the April, May time is a good time to engage, because we know we've often got a lot of understanding about what capacity and capability is available to do projects in the next financial year. So if you want certain people or certain types of capabilities, that's a really good time. We are trying to balance it though, because we're very conscious of workloads. So we're trying to, in terms of delivery, have them sort of staggered across the year. So yeah, really anytime you can come and talk to us, but sometimes we have less capacity if we've already got projects on the go. So that's why getting in early is a good option. Did you have anything?
Tracy, maybe one more from me.
Oh yeah.
You're a decision scientist.
Yeah.
Across the kind of design, collect, analyse and apply, where do you think, if you're someone in the audience here thinking about where's my return on effort in terms of engaging with ARI, what do you think is the proportional effort across those and where the value might be?
It really depends on the problem. I think if it's not a well-defined problem, then I think the design. So there's this famous saying by Einstein, give me a problem, I'll spend an hour to fix it. I'll spend 50 minutes planning out the problem and then 10 minutes solving it. And so often we think we don't understand the problem until we've scratched that surface. So there's, don't underestimate that. And I'm sure there's people nodding in the audience that the amount of time it takes to really understand the problem and make sure that everyone is on the same page. And the scope of that problem is well defined. So I think there's huge value in the scoping, because then it makes the rest of the problem fairly, it makes it a bit easier, because you don't want to get halfway down the track and go, oh, hang on a minute, I've got this other thing that we didn't consider. So you've sort of got to go back, you know, you may have to go back to the start again. So, yeah, so there is real value in that.
Jared, the engagement with ARI and the collaborative piece, you got?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I mean, the onus is on us too, but don't forget, look, we're a big building of researchers, and, you know, most of us, not me, but most of us are quite introverted. Like, there's a lot of people who'd rather be looking.
Surprise.
They'd rather be looking at a possum up a tree with a spotlight or catching a fish. And, you know, human interaction for people who have got a research background, the more you meet researchers is the more difficult thing.
What are you actually trying to say here, Darren?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, we're trying actively to get out and be more interactive with our partners as well. I know I always encourage staff to develop the relationship, and that enduring relationship with someone is something that makes it much more comfortable for researchers and their policy or management colleagues over the years. You know, I think, you know, a project might start with a relationship 10 years before. And it's generally how I've seen it happen over time.
Jen, did you want to add anything to that?
She's looking at a possum up the tree.
I just want to point out that us introverts, we can speak. So, and we do like interaction with people, just not too many people at the one time, that's all. So one-to-one is fantastic. So yes, please come and speak to us, because we'd love to engage with you.
Maybe while you've got the microphone then, Jen, First Peoples partnerships. How is ARI supporting First Peoples communities and embedding two ways of knowing in its research and strategy?
Okay, thanks, James. That's a great question. We currently work with traditional owners and Aboriginal corporations in a number of ways. Firstly, we work directly with traditional owner corporations to deliver pieces of work that they're interested in and things that are important to them. Often that'll involve working on country with traditional owners as well as part of the delivery. The other kind of work that we do is we might be funded, like by CMAs, for example, to work with traditional owners in like a field day kind of scenario, where we meet on country and we discuss things of interest to traditional owners and share knowledge and experience, which is always a really rewarding experience for scientists. And we also sometimes involve traditional owners in the work that we're doing separately. You know, we have a project that might be on a particular country, so we'll engage with traditional owners and invite them to join us. But this is a really growing space with treaty and heading towards self-determination, and we want to support that in a really meaningful and thoughtful way and respectful way. So we're trying to, although some of our scientists, having said that, some of our scientists have some really fantastic long-term relationships with traditional owners and have been working with them for years. A lot of us don't have that sort of level of relationship. So we're looking at ways of helping our scientists to understand how do we do that in a respectful way. And Brad, who's just sitting over there, has been running a series of 2 Ways of Knowing seminars, which has been really fantastic opportunity to hear from various people working in this space, including some traditional owners, about ways of engaging. So that's been really rewarding. And we're sort of learning a lot through that process. We know we've got a long way to go, but we're really keen and open to, being approached and sort of developing as we go. And, one of the key things for us is that engagement early is a really important thing in developing relationships and trust. And these things take time. And ideally what we'd like to do is get to a place where we're developing projects together with traditional owners and that we're delivering them as delivery partners. That's kind of the ideal world. Of course, sometimes funding shapes what we can do. So we're hoping to work in this space with our clients and project partners to develop that way of thinking, and then hopefully we can develop, co-develop projects and deliver them together, which I think would be much more meaningful for us all.
Any comments from? Yep. Thanks, Jen. That's great. So the next question's around research insights. Maybe I might ask Tracy to have a crack at this one. What emerging environmental challenges is ARI seeing through its research?
Thanks, James. I think there's quite a few, but three key ones that I've sort of been reflecting on. The first is that, as we know, biodiversity is subject to a whole range of threats, whether they're from the past and their legacy effects. There's current threats, and then there's emerging threats, so more extreme events, diseases. How do we tell more of a stitched up story about the cumulative impact of all of those types of threats on biodiversity? And we are some way along, but I think bringing together a lot of that threat information in a way that provides a more informed view of how biodiversity is being impacted and how it's tracking. I think the second one is that we don't manage typically, and for the most part, we don't manage biodiversity in isolation. It's often balancing needs of other types of values. So how do we bring biodiversity alongside those other values? So rather than it be around mitigating impacts, but instead considering it alongside other types of values. And these are, other environmental values that are economic, cultural, social, alongside those ecological ones. And I think we're doing it to some part, particularly Ange sort of mentioned in the fire space, there's this tool of thinking about ecological values within a fire space, so planners can be thinking about other kind of life and property and wellbeing values alongside ecological. But there's so much more work to be done in that space in terms of bringing thinking about biodiversity alongside other types of values, so those decisions can be more informed. The third area, I think, is around monitoring and evaluation. And so in a perfect world, we would have, monitoring every year. We'd be across the state. It'd be long-term. We would have a really good picture of how biodiversity is tracking, how effective are our management actions, but we don't live in that perfect world. So typically we get small amounts of money at most for a few years. How do we coordinate that monitoring and evaluation, those types of projects, to not just address the problem at hand, so the particular project that we have, but also contribute to a broader understanding of how biodiversity is tracking across the state. And so I think that's a real challenge, but I think it's also presents a real opportunity to sort of start thinking about, well, where should we be putting our efforts into monitoring? How do we bring this information together? And then how do we think about where we're putting our efforts into monitoring? So they're the three main ones that I can see. But
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
So you talked about the multiple values. You've talked about the monitoring bit. Perhaps my comment before about, I think, we do things within the policy areas, but at the moment it's probably fragmented. That's a comment for me, not anything else. How easy is it to solve that from our end? Maybe that's the question.
I think I think we're a long way along. So I think ARI has spent decades developing information about where species are. So a lot of the species distribution modelling that has happened here has just been groundbreaking in terms of trying to understand where our biodiversity values are. So I think that is a real foundational piece of work that will have long legacies, and obviously, we can update those with new methods, new data. I think we're some way along the way with the threat information, but I think that's tricky because threats play out in different ways, and often we'll represent threats as a spatial characterisation, but it doesn't always manifest as a spatial impact. So, for instance, you think about wind farms; it's actual individuals that are getting impacted, rather than say land use where they're clearing. So that's a lot trickier, and I think we're a little bit away along that way. But there's still a lot of work to do in terms of how we bring together all the different information that we have about threats. And how we characterise that in a way that's meaningful.
And the monitoring bit, what's your sense of that?
I'm hopeful. I think that we've done a lot of monitoring, and there's a lot of expertise within ARI. I think in the first instance, we just need some time to be able to think about it and think, what does this look like? Obviously, it's going to be, how it plays out will just depend on the context of where we're at the moment in terms of funding those sorts of activities. But I am definitely hopeful about that.
Okay.
It kind of fits in this sort of question, I think, but one other thing we keep an eye on, obviously, as government employees is the political landscape and how to navigate that. And that is around, how people engage with the environment or the animals in it. At the moment, there's I suppose a bit of a push on, having people out in the environment and them enjoying the environment in the ways they like to enjoy it. And that comes and goes over time. And I guess what we try and do is ride those waves. And so we've always got an eye to the future and, the future opportunities to make sure we can keep our data integrity through those times, because that will happen regardless. And that's, a democracy. So that is what it is. And yeah.
I think we're also a little bit driven by community needs and sort of how community are feeling about things like, people, particularly during the COVID years, they really needed to engage with nature. And I think that was a really strong driver in sort of supporting things to be protected and enjoyed. Now that seems to have, as Jared said, that seems to have changed a little bit, and people are now looking at, well, how can we go out and enjoy nature? So things definitely do change. So we try and sort of evolve as community changes and government responds to those changes.
Yeah, and what the community might be witnessing as part of H5 is going to be kind of interesting in itself. Well, we've got the microphone then, Jen. So we've heard a little bit today from the presenters about new technology. So how is ARI embracing technology to collect, manage and use data?
So as nerdy scientists, we just love new technology and innovation. That's kind of, it's our wheelhouse really. And I'll just run through a few of the things that we're doing. At the moment, we're really building our capability in the area of use of drones. So we've got like a little stable of drones that we now have that can do some amazing things. And we have a fully qualified flight manager and some other pilots. So we're really looking for ways and projects where we can use those new skills and learn from that. So that's really exciting. We also have some incredibly experienced and talented molecular ecologists on my team. There's 2 people on my team, Carlo and Lauren, and they do some incredible work in the field of genetics and collecting and analysing data. We've got good partnership with the AgriBio Labs, so we're really well placed to analyse the data, to process the data and then analyse it to answer a whole heap of different and really fascinating questions. Like I read a paper the other day that Carlo put in for internal review about identifying how old an animal was from its poo. Who knew you could do that? Apparently you can now. So that's really exciting, and sort of thinking through how those sorts of techniques will be able to inform management going forward, which is really great. Another area, of course, is audio acoustics. We've been developing some AI software models that allow us to identify species, frogs, some mammals, some birds, from recordings of their calls. And this is an amazing technique because you can go out and put out some sound recorders and they record hours and terabytes of data, and then we can use these models to quickly analyse the data and identify what species are making the calls. So this is such an amazing innovation, and it really has kind of revolutionised the scale of the surveys that we can do, the amount of data that we can collect and analyse. So that's been a really positive innovation. Of course, models aren't the absolute answer. So what's really important is that we have the skills to validate those models. And so that's a really key part of what we do. And I think and you've heard it from the presenters and also Trace and Jared, that, you know, our staff really are our core strength here. We've got between us collectively probably hundreds of years of species expertise and, you know, understanding of ecosystems. And so these sorts of things are really key when you're collecting this data with innovative methods, just to have a bit of a sense check. And the same, you know, we've got incredible analytical and modelling expertise across the Institute, but it's really important that we can interpret the outputs of these models and make sure that they're grounded in ecology. I think that's one of our really key strengths.
Yeah, and I reckon that's a great example of what I mentioned at the start about the collective expertise and the different disciplines we have across the Institute, and how they can come together to really value add to each other and deliver things which are, you know, kind of create, yeah, kind of have the highest impact. Jen, do you have this is a weird question, but do you have a sense of the kind of before and after, say, deployment of sort of cameras and acoustics, like the level of effort that might have been involved from before to now? And was that?
It's interesting. It's kind of changed. I was talking about this with somebody, I can't remember who it was, the other day. And, you know, before we used to do much more on-ground techniques where you'd spend a lot more time in the field, actually, you know, like walking through the forest spotlighting, Jared's favourite thing. And we still do that, by the way.
As a hobby.
Yeah. Oh, no. And also sort of surveying animals in a more direct way. But now we have these indirect techniques. So although the time that we used to spend, we spend much less time actually in the field collecting the data, we now spend a lot more time in the office processing the data and curating it. So it's sort of flipped, really.
Yeah. And we're talking about huge amounts of data now. So if there's anyone in the audience who's got a really great solution for how we're going to solve the storage and management of terabytes and terabytes of data going forward, we'd love to talk to you within the constraints of the Victorian Government information policy.
I guess just to add to that, one thing that's always on our mind is that we maintain that core sort of ecological capacity. So while all the new technology is fantastic and you can get a lot more data collected, you could imagine over time, you know, having more data scientists and people dealing with the data and less of the people who've got that underlying ecological knowledge. And I think that's something we think about a lot at ARI to make sure we've got that right balance. Yeah, so it's just a thought.
So robots won't be replacing
No robots,
soon.
not yet.
Good. Okay, well, thank you. That's some really great insights there. Now, this is everyone's in the audience's opportunity. We've got about 20 minutes left. So, Tess, I think you're going to have the microphone and walk to people who put up their hand and then ask the question, and then we'll have to bring the microphone back up to our presenters to answer. So we might start with the room, and then we might go online. Andy's watching the online questions. So hands up. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and where you're from, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Dave Crook from La Trobe Uni. I think one of the most exciting things in the fish conservation space in the last few years has been the captive breeding protocols that are being developed, and ARI's got the 10 in 10 program up at Snobs Creek. So I feel like, we're developing these recipe books that we can produce threatened species, not just the recreational fish, at scale in the next, decade. So probably directed at Jared, but I'm interested in the long-term vision about once we've got these tools in our hands, how do we sort of bring them together to balance biodiversity and recreational outcomes in fisheries?
Great question.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it is really exciting and a big step in freshwater conservation. And I guess there's two parts to that. The first part is the kind of process we're going through at the moment, which is slow because we're scraping together money, and that's about how we scale up and prioritise where species might be so that there's meaningful conservation output, and that will take time. The balance thing, I think, my take on this, and happy to hear anyone else's, is it's about partnerships. And so I think in Victoria, for better or worse, we've worked quite closely with the angling groups who historically were very focused on the recreational component of the fishery. And because, a bit like I talked about partnerships before, because we've got trust and partners and, people in sort of positions of influence now throughout that network that trust us, they're much more open to have the conversation about that balance between conservation and recreation. And I think that's probably the way to deal with it. I don't think it could be dealt with in a top-down way because it will just annoy people, and, people will jack up and say no and do the opposite just, because they can. And so, yeah, I would say it's about the partnerships are really important and having that joint understanding. I think also probably over time there's a shift towards that more conservation sort of underlying conservation sort of feeling in community as well. So, if you'd asked someone 30 years ago about conservation of a crayfish or a galaxid, they would have looked blankly at you. But now they get quite excited about that. But I mean, that's also because their peers are telling them that it's a good thing. So, yeah, I think it's about the partnerships.
And I reckon part of that is also, the science that inputs into those, because there are trade-offs, right, across different user groups, different policies. So how do you bring the science to bear that's going to inform those trade-offs is a really important piece. Lucas at the back.
Hi everyone, Lucas Luff from Deepen Regions Division, and jumping off on that similar topic, James, I think so much of the ARI's value is in that these are social questions, these are political questions, they're interests from different parts of society here that embedded in what the ARI works in. And the reason science is exciting because it's dangerous. It's because it's at the cutting edge. You may find out something inconvenient, or the way that you, Tracy, make a decision process that may lead to an alternative decision rather than a politically safe decision may be a dangerous fact. So really a question for anyone in the leadership team. How does ARI balance that sort of paradox between being an unsafe, dangerous place, but at the same time, it's all about trust and relationships over time, and ARI is a neutral broker?
We're going to ask the same question of you back in a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. It is a difficult space to be in, and we often have to walk a very tight line between competing priorities and competing interests. But I think we do it amazingly well. Sometimes it can be a little bit discouraging, where we've done this amazing science and we really want it to feed into policy decisions, but it's really sensitive, so we can't talk about it, and then the information isn't able to be shared. And that can be, as scientists, that can be really frustrating, because we all really want to, have the best outcomes for the species of interest. So it is really tricky. From my own perspective, I've come from working in timber-related issues for many, many years, working in sort of trying to conserve species in areas that were being harvested for native timber. So I'm kind of really used to that sort of way of thinking, because it's always been constrained, and, we've never been able to public it. Like, you can't tweet anything, for example. No way. That sort of stuff. Not that, who cares about that, but it's just an example of the way we have to operate. And I think it's just so important that our colleagues in policy can have that trust in us and know that they can ask us to address these really gnarly questions that are really sensitive, and that we can be trusted to, that it doesn't go any further.
Yeah, I'd reinforce that. I think there's enough people at ARI who are quite good at what I see as threading the needle. In the aquatic section, obviously we deal with water and the debate. The old Mark Twain quote: "Whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over." I mean, it's hugely political, and I think, I think over time you learn techniques to get the most value out of the science that you can, and demonstrate and push that boundary as far as you can, while still keeping your job, to be frank, but while still giving government what it needs. But it is a real threading of the needle, whether it's in the wildlife or the decision space or the water space. I don't know that it's something that can be taught. I think it's something you kind of learn over time, personally.
I suppose I don't see them as dangerous spaces, or maybe I haven't worked in the really dangerous spaces since I've been in government, but I just see them as complex problems, and we deal with them all of the time. As I was saying earlier, I don't think that most problems are not one value, where there's often competing values. For me, I think what we offer is that we can bring those people, help bring people together to be on the same page, and then provide the evidence to make more informed decisions. Like, we're not the decision makers. We're just here to provide the evidence so that the decisions are more informed, particularly from a biodiversity perspective. And so that's where I really see our role in those kind of tricky spaces. We want to be in those tricky spaces because we do want to have biodiversity on the table so that they're considered in the best way possible, but we're not the decision makers. They're considering a whole lot of other things. And when I realised that, that was actually pretty comforting. It was just like, oh, okay, I need to get too upset about, because I'm not the one making the decision. I'm just there to provide that evidence in the best way possible.
I think our job is easier than the policy people, quite frankly, in that sense. Any? Yeah.
Thank you. It's Fern again from TLOC, and thank you, Lucas, for that question. This is one that was brewing in my mind as I was driving here this morning. It's a bit of a segue from Lucas's in a way. Apologies if it's a little bit outside scope, but it is National Science Week. Happy National Science Week to all who celebrate. And, you know, we've been talking just now, Tracy gave a really comprehensive answer to what are the threats to biodiversity. I'm interested in what are the threats to science. And I think some of those are misinformation and mischievous application of AI. You know, these are big emerging threats, I think, for the work of ARI and all of everybody involved in science. This is a societal issue. It's not ARI's problem to solve, really, but it will intersect with your work in big ways. And I'm just interested in your reflections on that. Thank you.
I've got my panel of experts over here.
As with everything in my life, I put it through a decision lens, a decision science lens. First of all is really trying to understand the problem, like what is, you know, and it's changing very quickly. And so we need to be very mindful of that. And so, I mean, we have very, you know, robust kind of processes in place to ensure our science integrity. I think we probably, you know, over time, depending on how sort of the, you know, misinformation and other kind of threats, I suppose, to science emerge, we need to be on the front foot of that. I mean, one thing in terms of integrity that that Jenny really alluded to is that we use new technologies in a way that's about answering ecological problems. And so we're always putting it through that ecological lens and interrogating the data that is used to inform those problems. But yeah, I mean, I agree there is a massive threat there to science misinformation. We just need to think about, you know, how we're going to respond, be aware of it, and then work out measures for responding to that. I don't know the answers, but other than just to be ready for it.
I reckon my comment, Fern, would be the risks lie with the decision makers in terms of how much they're influenced by misinformation. And so we've got a duty as public servants to ensure that government at least is provided with the evidence they need. And if they choose to go and make some other decisions, that's on them.
Yeah, I agree. I think I completely agree, and sort of work in some of those spaces where not misinformation, but maybe information that's come from not non-scientific sources is used to make decisions rather than the scientific information. I'd like to think, and maybe this is being a bit glass half full, that the public becomes a bit canny to that over time. I've seen that happen in a couple of areas where this has been going on for sort of 10 years or so, where people are now saying, well, hang on a sec, where's the evidence to back that up? And so I'm hoping that will happen, but that's just a hope.
My advice is don't look at social media either. It doesn't help your state of mind. Okay, we've got some questions from online. So the first one is, today we've heard a bit about some public and government-facing products about fire planning, ecosystem monitoring and species trajectories in relation to waterfowl. Do you have any advice for how non-government organisations can access the modelling and analysis to inform their efforts and outlook?
Sorry, I vagued out for a second. What's the question?
So it's about the public face. Oh, sorry, about the models that have been developed and the products, and how can non-government organisations or the community, how do they kind of access those things, and what's their availability? And
yes, I think Ange addressed some of this earlier. There are some decision support tools and data sets that are available through the Nature Kit website through DECA. Other more tailored our information products that we're developing are usually done within a particular project, and how that then, you know, is used in other projects. There's all of the governance that goes around that. So we're more than happy to have a chat to people about what we've got to use for different types of problems, particularly for those information products that are not publicly available yet. There is, I suppose, one thing to mention. We've just done a whole lot of work for the Commonwealth with respect to evidence and decision support tools for impacts under renewable energy. And so one of the decision support tools that we developed for that will be available online. So that was the idea of that, was to make that public facing. So that's sitting with the Commonwealth at the moment, but that's something that's going to be available. That's looking at population level impacts on species of risk to collisions.
And the outputs, if you're interested in the duck harvesting stuff that Dave was talking about, those reports are available on the GMA website, Dave. Yeah, so that's all publicly available information.
And just on that, I mean, we do have a lot of reports that are, published. So you can look at our ARI website for all of the published reports. And then in terms of the underlying information that goes into that, you can just contact us, and happy to have a chat about those.
Great. So the next question is, how does ARI directly influence public land managers to protect high quality threatened species habitat and raise biodiversity conservation as one of the key management priorities? Jen.
I guess that's really kind of the bread and butter work that we do. It's really important to us to collect the information that's going to help inform those decisions, and then work with our partners to interpret the data that we collect. And then, you know, like we've heard these guys say, the decision is then up to them. But we can have lots of conversations and work through information that might, you know, like in the timber harvesting space, for example, you know, we make particular recommendations about how to conserve a particular threatened species, but we have to understand that that's only one input, and that there are other stakeholders with other competing interests as well. But it's just really useful to have those really close links and relationships with our colleagues, and we can work really closely together to come up with something that's still beneficial for conservation.
And Jen tells a wonderful story of when she was working with our forest colleagues around special protections for threatened species in forests, and then someone opened the door and said, the Victorian government's just ended native timber harvesting, so they just went out to lunch.
But I also remember back in the early days when one of the key things we had to do was demonstrate to our colleagues in the timber industry that retaining habitat, as in large old trees on coops, was important. So really we came a long way from that point.
So there's a question here about several presentations. You've demonstrated strong use of spatial modelling and decision support tools. How do you see Earth observation and remote sensing evolving over the next 5 years to become a more central component of biodiversity monitoring and environmental decision making across Victoria?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that, and I don't see Matt or others in the audience that can address it. We already use Earth observations from space in a lot of satellite imagery in the work that we already do. We don't use it in isolation. It's always brought together with other ecological information that we have about sort of the environment, as well as the species, the target species of interest. So I think my view is that we continue in that space to see what is the most useful. So we're always looking at the data through the lens of the ecological principles. So if it's useful, we'll use it. If it's not useful, then we won't. So I think, there's a huge amount of information that is becoming available that will, but it's always through that lens of the problem and the ecological principles that underpin the system.
I reckon, so part of the answer is also that that kind of technology and information needs to be interpreted in terms of what it means for biodiversity. Yeah. And we've talked about, the ARI, it's no good just having kind of things sitting in a computer if it's just, turning out junk, right? So it's about how do you interpret that and what's meaningful. And of course, not everything's going to be able to be seen from space in terms of biodiversity. So it's how do you kind of get the balance right? Joe, did you want to add anything? No? All right. Look, we are out of time. I might wrap it up there. So thanks to our panel members. And thanks again to all those people who both provided questions prior to the forum and also during the session today. I just want to again thank everyone for participation today. I just want to reiterate that there's a real value in starting with the conversation with what's the problem that we're trying to solve here and where can science help. And because we've been part of government for so long, we understand the complexities of the policy environment, and we can leverage off our existing experience, our expertise, our data to help efficiently come up with design of science that's going to perhaps meet your needs. So if you've got a problem, don't kind of sit on it, come and have a chat to us about what that might be and how we might be able to help. And so we've talked about that process of the design, collect, analyse and apply, and that end-to-end kind of process. Ideally, it would be good if we're through that whole process, but equally we've got the skills and capabilities to insert into any of those elements depending on what your needs are. So come and talk to us. The door's open. Build some networks today. There's probably 20 odd ARI staff in the room. So please introduce yourself if you want to have a conversation. So with that, I just want to say before we do, before our online audience leaves us, I want to say thanks to Andy and Tess and Hayley and Sophie and Raris and others who have all helped with organising the day, the logistics. The turnout's been fantastic. We've had, I think, peak times, we had about 170 online. So it's great. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks everyone online for joining us as well, and have a great day.